Perfume. What is that? The stench of death?
Perfume on the radio.
You're listening to Perfume on the radio.
On lookout
Welcome to Perfume on the Radio. This is a bi-monthly program presented by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, a nonprofit based here in Los Angeles, California. My name is Maxwell Williams, and I'll be hosting today's episode. I'm on the board of directors at the Institute for Art and Olfaction, and I run a perfume brand called UFO Parfums, a DIY brand that mines the interrelated quarries of perfume and techno. Because of COVID, we've had to record this episode with the tools at hand, and because of that, the audio will sound a bit funky at times. So please bear with us. My friends who know me know that there are a few things I love more than a night out on the town. During the pandemic, I miss it more than anything. In the before times, I used to produce something called Scent Rave. I would invite DJs to play, and I'd make a scent for them to distribute to the room during their set, creating a curated atmosphere of techno music and perfume. My theory is that music and perfume play similar roles in our lives. Perfume is the organization of molecules that we can smell, and music, the organization of the waves we can hear. Smell and sound both go through our amygdalae and our hippocampi, our limbic systems, which rule over our memories and emotions. If you can stimulate these two pleasure centers, perhaps, just perhaps, you can cause a hedonic two-for, which is just a fancy way of saying the unts mixed with the sniff might make the world a better place for many of us. In this episode, I'm going deep into clubland and speaking to practitioners of underground music and niche perfume, and particularly those who blur the lines between these two worlds. My first guest is Maria Golovina, the perfumer behind Holynose Parfums, a fragrance brand based in Moscow. She, along with brand owner Pasha Nikandrov, have been creating exhilarating perfumes since 2015. In 2019, Holynose Parfums released a perfume to go along with the Russian translation of Der Klang der Familie, Felix Denk and Sven von Thulin's classic book originally published in German in 2012 about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and how from that event sprang a techno scene in the abandoned buildings of East Berlin. The scent is meant to evoke the smell of the legendary nightclub Tresor. I started our conversation by asking Maria how the project came to be.
So we have a great publisher here in Moscow that is called White Label. They publish a lot of great books about music, club culture, video games. One of the great work is Last Night a DJ Saved My Life by Bill Brewster and Frank Broughton. And they've also translated Electroshock to Russian and reissued the book. They've adapted Ed Bisker's Hip Hop Family Tree for Russian readers and collectors. So they're really great guys, and one of the founders of White Label, the publisher. At some point, he's also a great music journalist and the chief editor of Mix Mag Russia. His name is Ilya Voronin. So at some point, he decided to create a sub-project, another publishing house, and he called it Shum, which means noise in Russian. And he decided to start with that German book called Der Klang der Familie, about the Mauerfall, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the early techno scene in Berlin, and all this East-West Germany story, and the story of Tresor, the club. We've always been in touch with Ilya. He's a great friend of ours, and we've discussed a lot the olfactory side of clubbing and the club culture. At some point, while translating the book, he realized there was a really cool quote by Johnny Stiller that described the smell of Trésor at the point they found out about the space, the place. He gave the precise description of the smell. So when Ilya stumbled upon this description, he immediately contacted us and kind of came up with an idea of expanding the reader's experience and adding the olfactory dimension to the book.
Trésor was originally in the underground bank vault of the Wertheim department store. Can you tell me about how it came to be that the smell of the bank vault was what you focused on with the fragrance?
Yeah, so we really wanted to stick to the original quote by Johnny Stiller, where he described the smell as the very musty, earthy, rusty smell that wouldn't leave the place because of very thick walls and bad ventilation and obviously the oxidizing metal of the bank vaults. Altogether, we agreed that it shouldn't be the smell of a room that is full of people. It shouldn't be the human kind of footprint in there, only the untouched spirit of the original location and the smell that stayed on the clothes of the ravers and even kind of soaked in the walls of their apartments when they came back from the early raves. Because the smell, obviously, after they moved to another location, the smell changed. So the early smell was remembered and memorized only by the founders and the early ravers.
The OGs, they get the...
Yeah, the OGs, exactly.
So the development of the fragrance included talking to Dimitri Hageman, the Trésor founder, and some of the Trésor party people, right?
Yeah, so the thing is, the conversations were really funny. The main vis-a-vis in this process was Dimitri himself, and we chatted through WhatsApp. And, you know, obviously we were given a lot of artistic freedom and trust, and no one wanted like 100% historical accuracy from us. But Dimitri was pretty slow, but at the same time, very precise, very concrete with his comments. At some point, I realized he's like twice my age and he's a real club veteran. So I really cherished every comment and I wasn't too pushy. You know, at some point I was like, why isn't he answering me? And then I realized that probably, you know, staying on WhatsApp is a real challenge for him. And yeah, we also stayed in touch with Sven, one of the authors of the book, and obviously with Johnny Stiller himself, the main, how'd you call it? The guy who described the smell in the book. And we stayed in touch with Ilya, the publisher, and made a lot of takes on the smell. And yeah, it was pretty fun.
Cool. It sounds like fun to like talk to all these all the OGs.
Yeah, I was like on the Wikipedia. Okay, I have to change to check Dimitri's age, and then I realized he's 66 already, and he's such a cool dude. You know, with his descriptions, he really helped us to create the smell that was pretty close to what they remembered.
I mean, I'm definitely going to still be raving at that age. So
yeah.
So I love the fragrance. I got it, and the smell is like it's really strong. It's like blasts of metal and dirt and ozone and coldness. Can you tell me about how some of these elements came to be in the fragrance?
You know, it wasn't an easy task to create this fragrance, to be honest, because, you know, when you try to create something really metallic and rusty, you are left with a pretty narrow palette of raw materials, and most of them are very connected to nature. They're pretty green. They're connected to galbanum, to rose, and we really wanted to find something that would not draw a picture of something natural. We really wanted it to be a very technological, man-made space with a lot of texture and stuff like this. We've made a lot of versions, and some of them were too green or too earthy. So at some point we decided to use some nitriles, the group of components that really smell of oxidized metal. Dimitri himself insisted and wanted the smell to be pretty aggressive. He called it a wild rocket, something very masculine. He really didn't want it to be too wet, and he wanted us to get rid of bugs. He didn't want the smell of bugs, because when you create something earthy, sometimes it gets too moldy or something like this. So there's a lot of natural patchouli, clairwood, nitriles, some black pepper even, and jasmine for sure, the component that smells of soil and like an asphalt after rain.
I love jasmine. It's so versatile.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
So I noticed that Holynose's aesthetic, I was looking on your Instagram, and it really does kind of align with Trésor. You have kind of a techno vibe. Does underground music culture play a big role in how the brand operates otherwise, other than this fragrance?
Obviously, Holynose is inspired by the areas where suburbia clashes with natural landscapes. And obviously, German and Russian heritage, the kind of a Soviet era, really affected us in visual terms. Like you can see a lot of brutalism, architecture, constructivism, something that looks like Bauhaus or early Soviet avant-garde. Of course, the big part of urban life is club life and music. And me and Pasha, Pasha DJ'd some years ago. I still do collect vinyl records and play a lot of music. I wouldn't call myself a real techno head. We obviously love early techno, the original Detroit sound, and we love New Jersey house and stuff like this. We try to tell stories to people who are subscribed to us and people that love our fragrance. We try to stay away from, just selling product or, creating a brand that is only about perfumes and smelling good. We love to share our knowledge. We love to tell stories about music, about literature, architecture. Everything that inspires us goes to our Instagram. So probably that is why you really feel our sincere and natural vibe. And, one of our latest projects, we really love to collaborate with local artists, something really underground. So there is a small label that releases cassettes, tapes, and CDs, like analog kind of label. And one of their latest releases, the CD, it has an inlay paper that was heavily fragranced. We are pretty connected with music and club culture, and it really affects the way we look and what we do.
That's great. I mean, same here, pretty much. I mean, why do you think perfume and music goes so well generally together?
Well, we think that hearing and olfaction are both pretty primordial and affect our emotions easily, as simple as that. So music and olfactive experiences are pretty connected and operate the same way. And then we are also pretty fascinated by the vibrational theory of olfaction. And we really believe in frequencies. So maybe that's the real reason music and perfume really collide in what we do.
It was fantastic to talk to you and to meet you and Pasha.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Let's go from Trésor to Berghain on our little German olfactory club hop. My next guest is Isabel Lewis, a Dominican-born, Florida-raised, Berlin-based contemporary artist and choreographer whose work consists of what she has termed occasions. Though its primary language is dance, Lewis's work is meant to activate all of our senses. Brooke Holmes from Bomb magazine called Lewis a master of aesthetic technologies. Her strategies, moving, smelling, listening, spectatorship, conversation, storytelling, theorizing, for honing sensory experience and collective mindfulness as the conditions of being together and thinking together differently. In 2017, Lewis collaborated with olfactory artist Sissel Tolas to create a scent based on the legendary Berlin club Berghain. I asked Isabel about her connection with club culture.
Being that I'm trained in dance, that's sort of my background, it was a very organic step. There was so much that I was working out and experimenting with on dance floors from the time I'm a teenager, from hip hop clubs to raves. And that always remained an important creative outlet in my own life in terms of also experimentation with forms of sociality. So really when I arrive at sort of what I call now the occasions, it really was an organic growth into staying interested and staying fascinated by all that happens socially, experientially, sensorially inside of the club space.
Though your work might sort of immediately be taken as dance performance and choreography, this is a show about smell, and smell plays such a big role in your work. How did smell enter your work?
In many ways, I was searching for how to create an environment, literally, without actually having to build up material spaces and trying to actually avoid waste. And there's so much waste in the contemporary art world and in contemporary art practices. So this is something I've always been kind of critical of and was trying to find my own way, actually, of evoking a sense of place or site. That would be one aspect of it. The other, of course, being that I knew from my own just anecdotal experience how powerful smell is as the way that it gives an impression and the way that it connects to memory. So this kind of led me to research in that area. And I was lucky enough to encounter the incredible Sissel Tolas, very well-known and revered researcher, smell researcher specifically is how she calls herself. And she happens to live in Berlin, and we connected and started this journey that was really first about me learning about how smell works, both the sense of smell, but also how smells are composed and what it is exactly that we are smelling when we smell, which are basically arrangements of molecules.
This may be a little bit off topic, but I often think with contemporary artists, I'm like, how come you don't use smell? It's such a broad subject. It's there's so much there that you can mine. I mean, when you use smell in your work, you're using it in a way that is just like many other materials in contemporary art.
Absolutely. I think smell is really underrepresented in terms of as an art form and the potential of how you can use it to communicate and also to think and to imagine. So for me, especially in my work with Sissel, it's really important that the smell is not this idea of a background or this essence that is just sort of subconsciously in the room. It's really active, it's powerful, and it hits you right away. So it's something you can't really ignore. And then you kind of are forced to deal with what this is evoking for you, both emotionally or even intellectually or in terms of your imagination.
What were some of your early experiences with smell? And did that kind of inform you to utilize smell in your work?
Definitely. I think so. I think in my household, both of my parents were cooking and were both very good at cooking, and also cooking from these different cultural perspectives. My mother being Dominican, and so that smell of rice and beans cooking and beans stewing with coriander, over time, that's such a powerful and specific smell that also felt it helped me to connect as well to my family that was in the Dominican Republic and memories of spending summers in the Dominican Republic with my grandmother. I'm her namesake. And so I always felt we kind of had a special bond. I would help her sometimes to massage her arthritic knees as a young kid, and the smell of the ointment and the smell of, she used this kind of powder. She would use baby powder and just of her products and her hair products. And she always smelled very clean and warm smell, plus this medicinal smell of the ointment for her knees. So all of these things played big role for me. And I think for everyone, honestly, I think everybody probably has very strong memories associated with smell, those who are not affected in some way and cannot smell. So I think that certainly informed my interest in sort of what potential might there be in really actively considering smell in compositions when I did start to kind of make my own work and thinking choreographically, not only about the dancing bodies, but the entire space.
One of the reasons I asked you on the show is that you created the Berghain scent with Sissel. What was it that said, okay, I need to make the Berghain scent?
I have to say, it comes out of course, as with everything, kind of a long and organic process for me. But I had started working on this piece when I first met Sissel, and then came this kind of year of me visiting Sissel's lab and getting to know about smell itself, and that was like a year-long process. Inside of that process, I was creating a new work, the first of what would become called an occasion. In that show, I was looking at and thinking about sort of Western cosmology, sort of how do in this Western part of the world, and Europe and America specifically, where I've spent most of my time, how is it that we conceive of the body and how we conceive of the notion of the mind and that old division? But nonetheless, I was really wanting to more deeply mine this question and see if there might be a contemporary iteration of a site where the intellectual and the bodily could actually come together in a harmonious way. And I wanted to sort of create an example of that. And for me, that site of integration was the idea of the garden. So not only the sort of ancient garden, but also even like conceptually, what could be a garden as an occasion, as a gathering, as a place of gathering and enjoyment and reflection. So came these couple of questions. The first being, if intellectuality had a smell, if we were going to try to understand this culture that we've inherited through the Enlightenment, if we were going to try to make a smell out of that so that we could kind of feel it bodily and understand it, what would it be? And so Sissel and I started working on this, a completely abstract idea, a new smell in the world. It's not based on any other existing elements in the world. It's not derived from any oils. We were really inventing something. So an answer to that question. And of course, that came along with the second question. If bodily culture had a smell, what would it be? If the culture of the body, if we could somehow in one sniff sort of understand the intensity of humanity, what would that smell be? And that for me came with a very clear reference. Berghain, of course, like this place where I go clubbing, this place where I've spent hours and hours like sweating it out on the dance floor and having all kinds of experiences there. I thought that must be, if I were trying to condense what like bodily culture could smell like, the human extremes of experience, that would smell like the inside of a club, like at the end of a very, very long weekend. And so actually I went to, many times I've been to Berghain, and I decided to go one particular evening with my sense of smell switched on. I didn't consume anything actually that night. I was only drinking water, and I just switched on my sense of smell in the sense of just becoming aware or conscious of it. And I have to say, it's one of the most psychedelic nights I've ever had there, just by tuning in to that sense. So I had my night there in Berghain, and I went the very next day to Sissel's lab, also with the clothes I was wearing from the night before as a reference. And we started talking about it, and she was taking notes about the memory. So again, that smell is more, it's based on my memory of Berghain. It wasn't that we went to Berghain and captured smell molecules. It was very specifically composed from my memory of that night before and of many times in that club.
Amazing. I love that. Tell me a little bit about your show that's upcoming at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and what we can expect from it, and if you have some sort of smell component with that.
Yes, Sissel and I are in conversation at the moment, working towards what will be part of my show at the Hammer, which I'm very much looking forward to. In terms of my conversation with Sissel specifically, because there's other collaborators as well involved, we've been talking about, could we, there's the G4 gallery in the Hammer. What if we could just dig a hole in that gallery space, open up a massive hole and understand what's underneath the architecture and underneath the foundations of this space. The show is still very much in formation, and I don't want to give away too much, but for me, it's continuing a long line of research, which is about, how do we arrive to the understanding of the notion of the human that we have today in this part of the world? How did we get here? What are the problematics around it? And I'm seeing the show as something very personal, very direct. So it all sounds a bit abstract now because it's still early on, but I think it will come together as something quite direct, hopefully, and emotional.
Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on Perfume on the Radio.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. Really looking forward to staying in touch and learning more also about what you do over there.
The music you're hearing behind me is by Brian Pinheiro, better known to dance music fans from around the world as DJ Python. Last year, Matthew Schnipper of Pitchfork Media called DJ Python's sound unique in its swing and bottomless depth of feeling. The Miami-raised, New York-based Pinheiro has released two beautiful, spacious full-length records, Dulce Compagnia and Mas Amable, which have both been described and self-described as deep reggaeton, and would fit perfectly in a swanky club on the moon in the year 2054. Not long ago, Pinheiro happened upon my UFO Parfums Instagram, and we struck up a conversation about his perfume collection and our mutual love of club music and fragrance. So I called him up to talk about why those two things happen to fit so well together.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for coming on Perfume on the Radio.
Yeah, for sure.
How did you get into perfume?
My grandpa used to wear Knees 10. Mm-hmm. I think it's Austrian. And my grandma used to wear L'air Bleu, Guerlain. And then my grandpa passed away when I was in high school, I guess. And so I just used to wear his cologne or perfume to think of him and stuff. After that, I started getting really into it. I think I wore Cool Water when I was in middle school. I wore Burberry London in high school. And then I started wearing my grandma and grandpa stuff. I wanted to understand it more. And then I think the first niche perfume I bought was Hinoki, I think. The Comme des Garçons monocle was at this shop called Babalu in Miami. And then there was other niche perfumes. And then I just got so into it.
What I do is kind of independent niche kind of thing, really kind of underground. And I feel you do something similar with music. And I wonder if you think about if there's a correlation between niche perfumery and underground music.
Yeah, I actually think so for sure. There's definitely designer stuff and designer music that's really, really interesting, or pop music. But then I guess the niche stuff is kind of more for the people who are just kind of entrenched in that culture. Yeah, I think kind of trying new things. Definitely I feel some of the Comme des Garçons synthetics could be so that's what PC music is or something like that. You know what I mean? This kind of taking of really pop or common stuff.
Trying to do new things. I feel that's sort of the big thing is that there's this space for a little bit more experimentation or trying to, do something a little bit new with a form. I don't know if this is something that people bring up about your music a lot, but you do have these kind of reggaeton rhythms sometimes. And I feel reggaeton is this hyper mainstream, the most viewed videos on YouTube are all reggaeton videos. You know, people watch, like, they're like 500 billion views or whatever for like the latest Natty Natasha song. But then it's like you have like this sort of like, it's almost like experimenting with the rhythm.
I think it's actually kind of perfumey vibes because like, I just like grew up with a lot of that music in Miami. And then when I first like started messing with stuff and kind of like trying to recontextualize it, I was trying to like link my memory. So I think it is like similar in the way that I'm trying to like use certain like signifiers to bring up like certain memories to me or to like other people. The way that I think like perfume, some of the notes and stuff can like really bring up certain memories, and then you can kind of like mix it and create something kind of different.
I wonder if like it goes the other way, like if like you have any kind of synesthetic relationship to your music in any way that you think like sometimes like, oh, that note kind of smelled good or something.
I don't know if like I go that far, but when I like am producing and stuff, I definitely like always wear pretty sandalwood heavy stuff. If it's just for myself, I don't know why. I just love that note, I guess, and like it makes me feel grounded or whatever. And then also like when I DJ, I always wear like iris or incense, and I always like carry around samples with me if I'm on tour and stuff, and I like put it on right before I play to like relax, because like I don't like drink or do drugs or anything, so that's like kind of like my ritual. I've seen like people in studios like they'll do things like take off their shoes or like light incense before they start making music and stuff, and it's like the incense thing I think is like something that's really entrenched with like music people in like every type of scene and stuff. And I feel like perfume is becoming more, because of like the Aqua di Gios and like cool water and all that kind of stuff. People think it's like kind of like this like almost like douchey thing, for lack of better words. But now I feel like people are like understanding that it's like also an art form, and like it's getting more accepted and stuff within like not just fashion circles, but like, you know, music and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess like the other thing is like when you go into like the club, like I oftentimes think like the club has like kind of this like specific smell of its own, and it's like kind of, it's not great. Like it's a place where like sort of, and there's a lot of kind of like good smells and bad smells and like toilet smells and alcohol smells and like all those types of things. And I like, it's kind of the perfect place for perfume, but I feel like it's sort of like underutilized maybe a little bit. Maybe it's not really a question, but I feel like it should be like more a part of the underground.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool if people thought about that, like the way that they think of like lights or like the way that things are placed in the room or whatever. I mean, the most I've seen is like, yeah, people who just like heavily incense the place. But it would be cool if there was like more like it pumping out different smells throughout the night, like kind of the way that you control the lights would be so cool. Like, I don't know how expensive that would be, but that would be like amazing. Because someone, you know, a lot of people do the lights for all night. And yeah, to do different scents, like along with like, I guess the intensity of like the way that the evening is going and stuff would be so sweet. Have you, because you do like raves with scent in it, I'm like curious what you do with it, like what your process is.
Yeah, no, that's like a big part of like what I'm trying to do is to like is to bring more smell into unusual musical spaces, or like unexpected, I guess.
I just remembered too of something that was pretty sweet that I did that was like music time with Perfume, but there was a dinner and it was like a sound and smell or whatever, and it was with you. There's a perfumer here, Marissa, I don't know her last name, but she does Redmond's perfumes. She made notes for you to smell before something was served, and then I was like supposed to DJ stuff also while people were eating, and then you had to put like a blindfold on, and you like smelled these notes, and then you ate what you ate, and then like I had to be like playing a certain kind of music, and it was like this like just taste, smell, sound experience.
That's really interesting. I've like gone to like a very similar thing, like a blindfolded dinner done by a perfumer. and they had like music too. It's interesting with like perfume stuff. It's like it's always sort of heads in similar directions because it's such like people haven't messed around with it as much as they have with the other art forms, I feel like.
I mean, because so much of the music I like now is like just due to like it's really accessible to like make music on like a computer now. You can just like pirate whatever software and like just make beats and stuff. So I feel like that's like really helped push music, especially like on a global scale. So like I'm curious how you can do that with like perfumery, like make it really accessible to a lot of people to like mess around with that kind of stuff. Because even for me, like I love perfumes, but I have zero clue on like where to get started if I wanted to do something on my own.
The difference is yeah, you can't really like bootleg a perfumer starter kit.
Right. It's so true. It'd be cool if there was like workshops or spaces like in, you know, just different cities where you can just like go try stuff out.
That's what the Institute for Art and Olfaction is. I mean, maybe you take a couple of beginner classes and then you just pay a lab fee, like a really nominal lab fee, and all you have to do is like bring your own materials. The problem is the materials themselves. That's where the real gate is. Spending, you know, hundreds of dollars on materials is not something that everyone can do, which is really unfortunate. Like DJing, for instance, like you could bootleg everything. You could do it for free, basically, and make $100 at your first gig. So have you ever like made a track that like has like a scented kind of like to you, like you were thinking about perfume in any way?
Yeah, the last record I did, I like only wore what's it called, Coromandel, the Chanel one that's like patchouli incense and cocoa or whatever. And then the record before that, like the Dulce Compañía, I only wore Iris Silver Mist when I made it. Yeah, so it's not like after, but it's like definitely like the thing that I was like trying to feel like when I was making those tunes. I think the Iris one was more just like a personal influence. I just like felt comforted or whatever. And then I think the Coromandel one like really helped make that record like kind of warm to me and trying to be sweet. Yeah, I always wear like perfume when I make tunes.
My last guest is one that's very special to me. I first came across Oval 20 years ago while working at a college radio station in Florida. The record that had just come out, Oval Process, blew me away. And there was something both futuristic and exactly of the moment about the jittering, glitchy record. But what stood out most to me was the emotional heft, despite its computerized sound. That's par for the course for Markus Popp, the man behind Oval, who has been producing music for nearly 30 years. In fact, the music that you're hearing underneath this introduction is from his latest album, Sizz, which came out last year on Thrill Jockey, and I believe is his 16th record. After I became a perfumer, I was researching connections between music and perfume, and Oval came up again. Though still making music, Popp has recently become a mentor to artists from around the world. Part of his mentorship includes salons at his house, which oftentimes include a perfume smelling session. To top it off, in 2018, Popp released a radio play called Oval Aroma about his relationship with perfume and music. On a recent day in January, I was honored to pick Markus Popp's mind about where perfume and music meet and where they diverge.
How did you get into perfume?
They were always there as a fascination, I would say, that started pretty early. At age 15, I had my first, which I don't have now anymore, like a signature fragrance. And I had JHL. I was wearing that at 15. So that kind of maybe tells you something about like taking this stuff like seriously, even like from the beginning.
The culmination of your interest in perfumery is Oval Aroma, a radio play about perfume. Can you tell me a little bit about it and where this concept came from?
Yeah, so basically, I've been at the forefront of, say, electronic music and beyond a little for decades. If you do that long enough, you know all the shortcuts and time-saving techniques and cheap cop-outs and quick and dirty solutions, whatever, tricks, workarounds, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, you know how the kind of sausage is made. And of course, something gets lost in that process. Yeah, like if you really love food, you shouldn't be working in the kitchen of a restaurant, right? So perfume, on the other hand, was always delivering this sudden like strike from above. And isn't that the essence of like inspiration? And that is kind of what this radio play and the music that goes with it, there's like almost like an hour of original music in there, tries to capture, like the differences between like being in music and working on things and kind of the sense of discovery that was your focal point at the beginning, but at some point stuff changes. And perfume, on the other hand, is this like essence of just feeling hit by this thing that's inexplicable. And that was what the radio play was all about. And I'm still working on the music. Like it's going to be an album. Hopefully I'm going to finish it in 2021.
Music and perfume have a lot in common. I tend to think of them as similar things. Music is the organization of sound, perfume is the organization of smell. They pass through similar parts of our brain, particularly our memory centers. Also, most perfume language is borrowed from our other senses, none more so than music, such as the organ, is the term for perfumers. Their laboratory is considered an organ. Notes, when we talk about notes, that's directly a metaphor for music. What are some connections you've made with perfume and music?
Well, I have this 13-page lecture in front of me right now. And it's a lot. Like it's from the typology, that both perfume and music have to do with, and deal with, trends, fads, hypes, victories and defeats, success stories, failures, hidden gems, celebrated creators, outsiders, charlatans, carnival barkers, unsung heroes, all that kind of stuff happens in both, and of course they are both technical in all sorts of ways, and they have many atmospheric similarities. And then we have the compositional part, and the culture part, and the artistry, and the business aspect, and then I could go way into detail here, but that's what kept me going. I would even go as far as saying that, like perfume was always this thing in my life that went on together with working on music, and both couldn't really be without the other. And they were this thing that belonged together, even though perfume was really just in the shadows, right? It was like my hobby, technically, and as I said earlier, I really just wanted to be a fan. But that's also fun. I would say that's even more fun in certain ways than to be a, recording artist with all sorts of things on your plate. And to be just a fan is fantastic.
You host a kind of salon of sorts at your home called Oval Expo, is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
And where people kind of get together to talk about art, and you also present your perfume discoveries. Can you tell me a little bit about Oval Expo, how it kind of came to be, and your experiences in introducing olfaction to people?
Yeah, that kind of ties in with my mentoring practice. That's something I started like a few years ago now. And I'm working with artists from all over the world, mostly over Zoom these days, obviously. And then I set up these events to, bring people together, kind of just gather some insight into their projects and situations and struggles, and hopes and dreams and all that kind of good stuff. And Perfume was really just this thing I wanted to bring in something unexpected in terms of like, how can this be even described? Like, what's happening here? What are the questions, that this evokes, And so I was really just starting to add this perfume thing to these meetings, and that was great. And it's a great conversation starter. And of course, due to the similarities of perfume and music, for example, or other creative disciplines, there's all sorts of talking points emerging from that, like characteristics, like what's absoluteness, for example. What's absoluteness in this, like as a term, and in this scent here, smell. And then I picked like a really strong, like modern, dark, bold composition, like a niche thing, from like a few years ago. And then people went like, whoa, and then I said, okay, so how does this smell? Like, what does this smell like? How do you feel about this? What does this remind you of? And even more importantly, what kind of feelings does this scent evoke that you cannot describe? Because this is where it gets interesting, right? So that kind of stuff. Then, for example, if we want to stay with the absoluteness, I would ask, okay, so what would absoluteness feel like, sound like, for example, in your particular music, in your particular situation, in your particular project, stuff like that. And so all sorts of stuff comes from these perfume sampling sessions.
So the next question is, do the fragrance subcultures you've been introduced to seem to have a corollary to the music subcultures you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious technical parallels regarding certain developments, similar to what happened in the music world or the music industry, as it were, because it's barely existing anymore. So yeah, late 70s, early 80s, indie labels, tiny DIY labels and publishers coming to market and kind of like introducing like new aesthetics and new ideas. And yeah, that's definitely a parallel, I would say. I think it technically almost started at the same time. Like, I think Maître Parfumeur et Gontier, that's basically the first niche label, and that they started, I think, in the late 70s. So that's almost the same time. So that's the technical parallels. Regarding the actual scents, sure. There's like a certain abstract component, like a certain hyper-real kind of characteristic, like a certain absoluteness. We want to go with this term again, in modern niche stuff. And the, say traditional like powerhouse, whatever, 80s kind of classics, they're more from the old analog world, if you will. But that distinction, like analog, digital or natural versus synthetic, that's not exactly how it went, I think, because like I think the synthetic components, they were part of perfumes since 1911 or something. But I don't actually need to know this, because I'm just a fan, remember? So I think it's interesting to kind of think about these things, but then I draw my conclusions and I do my music professionally and I enjoy my perfumes privately.
What makes a good fragrance for you?
Something that remains inexplicable about a perfume that hits me, and even years after I first encountered it, I still cannot put my finger on what's happening in the fragrance, in me, this kind of level. And that is, as I feel, independent from like favorite ingredients. I think it's maybe this will sound a little esoteric, but it's the atmosphere. It's the gesture. It's the impact. It's the storytelling almost. I think a good perfume is one with a uniqueness that is above being dissectable, like it's almost beyond sitting down and breaking it down into categories. Like, is this a fougère? Is this aromatic fougère? Is this whatever, aromatic fougère plus aquatic components, blah, 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 I don't care. I could do it, I'm kind of experienced to a degree, I guess. But ultimately, if I really look at my, say, essential, like 50 fragrances here, I have them in front of me right now. What's going on exactly in each of those is always a different experience. It's always shape-shifting in the most fascinating ways. And of course, there's so many other criteria I could apply here, because there's milestones, there's secret weapons, there's time capsules, there's respectable achievements, there's iconic scents, there's guilty pleasures in there, there's research topics in there. But the actual essence of what I really love, I absolutely cannot express. And I'm pretty good with words in my native tongue. So, because I'm a writer, basically. So music in my life kind of just happened. So I studied to be a writer. So I should, I should be able to kind of explain what's going on here and what fascinates me about these. But
I studied to be a writer and I'm a perfumer, and I still struggle sometimes with.
And isn't that the best part? I feel that's when it gets interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, sometimes I don't even want to know what I'm smelling. I just like the mastery of like the blend. Maybe it's 3-dimensional and I'm like, wow, that's so 3-dimensional. That's like better to me than going, oh, this has, cologne in it or something.
I mean, technically, as a perfumer, you would also have to have that base covered. Right? Like you would have to know, okay, this goes in and that much of it, and this is fortunately what I don't have to worry about over here,
You shared with me your fragrance collection on Perfumo, which for those who don't know is a kind of perfumery database where people can kind of show the perfumes that are in their collection. And it seems like you have a good mix of mainstream perfumes from the bigger brands, the Versace's and things like that. Maybe.
Oh yeah, of course. The first one is there, the 84.
Oh, there you go.
Versace is right there. Yeah, proudly,
So a mix of bigger brands and independent or niche fragrances. Does your music collection follow a similar path? Are you into pop music as much as you're into sort of smaller independent music?
No, not really. I mean, as I explained before, like they're two separate things. And I'm not even sure about this analogy of, mainstream versus, subculture / underground, whatever. Of course you can approach things in that kind of way. And it kind of serves kind of like a purpose for orientation. I mean, that might be helpful at certain stages of getting into music or perfume. Like this is on this label and this is mainstream and this is niche, and came out in an edition of 100 numbered copies or bottles. So yeah, that's cool. That this kind of stuff exists, and it's definitely enriching the landscape and the overall picture. But in perfume, it's all about the atmosphere and the impact the actual scent has on me, regardless of the marketing and the label and so on. And in music, it's difficult to say, because like as a listener, that's how I started. As a listener, sure, there were like favorites and favorite labels and favorite artists, and this is cool and this is not, and here's why, and all that kind of stuff, But now, and like for decades already, I'm doing this for real, and that's a completely different set of criteria. Plus, I'm working with artists every day, and I'm getting into their projects pretty deep, it's like a real deep dive into all sorts of different propositions, ideas, biographies, aesthetics, and so on. So I do have to do like a lot of homework, research kind of stuff of all sorts of different musics I was not necessarily in touch with before. So music for me is this huge open canvas kind of thing, and I'm very deeply involved, but not so much as a listener anymore. Like as a listener, that's like a long time ago, like I can of course still activate the listener in me, I can open, and I'm doing this every day, like checking out some SoundCloud or listening to some new version, iteration of whatever track, the artist I'm working with is working on. And of course I can activate the listener again, but that's a completely different set of criteria than like mainstream versus niche. Plus I'm in electronic music, so it can be a little technical, like I'm not a programmer, and I never will be, but I don't want to be, never wanted to be, but it still has to do with like a lot of tech and a lot of like learning and a lot of like putting things together. And it's kind of a mission in itself to kind of carve out the music from that. So whether or not something is pop or something is a mixtape that came out in like 10 physical copies, it doesn't make a difference.
Cool. Well, I think that's a great note to end on.
You're listening to Perfume on the Radio.
On lookout,
Well, that just about takes care of our club hop through the smelly underground. Thanks for taking the time to listen. This episode of Perfume on the Radio has been produced by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, and I was your host, Maxwell Williams. A list of the music from this episode can be found at perfumeontheradio.com. Saskia Wilson-Brown will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode, the second half of her 2-part series exploring perfume and class. Until then, do your nose a favor and smell some beautiful things.